here we go. Miss Beers is trying something new in order to help you all maybe, just maybe, get a little farther a little faster. Um, I contacted Paul Anderson, who does Bozeman Biology, and so I'm going to give this a shot and we'll see how it works. I can only do small clips at a time, so we're going to take Self Communication, Chapter 11 in your book, little by little. I'm broadcasting in the dark right now. We may try this again later, and I may not. Who knows? You know me. So, anyway, part one. We have three types of signaling in cells. Signaling means how cells communicate with each other. First, there's direct contact. That would make sense. Cells are right next to each other, so it's called cell-to-cell recognition. We've talked before about efficiency, evolutionarily speaking, in animals and plants and stuff. And as you'll notice, I say, wouldn't it seem silly that a cell that's directly next to another cell would have to send a chemical signal into the bloodstream so it travels around the body just to come back and go to the very next cell to it? That would be dumb. That would be not efficient. So cells, both plant and animals, have openings into the adjacent cell so communication can occur this way. It's much quicker. An example will be embryonic growth or immune response. If you look at the next slide, which we are looking at the plasma membranes here on the animal cell and the plant cell, we have the gap junctions between animal cells. This was when you were doing the cell organelles. Anyway, and you have gap junctions between animal cells so that we just send the message right on over. In the plant cells, it's called a plasmodesmata. Also on cell-to-cell recognition, we've got to make sure that we're sending the message to the right cell. So you will notice that the cell is able to look at that and say, hey, look, you belong to me, rather than send a message maybe to a virus cell or a bacterial cell. This goes wrong when, of course, you have autoimmune diseases and stuff like that. Local signaling is a little bit different just because there's a short distance that needs to be traveled. So in order for this to occur, you have to have a chemical signal. And these are called local regulators. This type of signaling in animals is called paracrine signaling. Now in plants, they're not sure how the process works, but still working on it. But what we're worried about is the word paracrine, which you'll need to understand for the very next slide. Example of this, of course, you learned this in middle school, and you've also had it in health, that neurotransmitters are what show up between dendrites and axons in nerve cells. When the electrical signal is initiated, it gets to the end of the nerve cell, which is where the dendrites are, and there's gaps, the synapse per se, and then it has to get from that synapse to the other nerve cell, and so it jumps. Well, what it has to have is some type of chemical there in order to be able to jump, and we call these neurotransmitters. And then, of course, there are diseases that cause neurotransmitters not to be there, and they'll cause weird things like Parkinson's and stuff. And then there's also the time when it's really good, like, for example, long-distance runners produce something called endorphins, which is the feel-good, what we call a feel-good chemical. And what it does is it will block those neurotransmitters, and pain's not necessarily transmitted. Another example would be one cell releasing growth hormone, telling the other cells to divide and grow. And here's a picture of this. In this case right here, you have the cell that's able to secrete, and it targets the cells that are near it, and then it tells them to do something, for example, grow. In this case, you're looking at the dendrites and then the axon, and right here you have the neurotransmitters that are diffusing across that synapse. The last one is long distance signaling. This makes sense to most of you all. This sounds more like what you're probably thinking about. You have to send a message either a long distance to either a specific organ or all over the body, and that's what we call hormones. A gland will secrete a type of hormone into the blood, and it will travel until it finds a receptor to attach to. Now this one is called endocrine signaling, not like paracrine signaling. Paracrine, short distances; endocrine, long distances. And of course we've got an entire chapter on the endocrine system. An example of this, of course, you know that the pancreas will send out insulin, which is a hormone, to the cells to say, please take glucose in to make ATP. And then they will take it in until there's not enough insulin left, and then the leftover glucose is wandering around until it's finally stored as glycogen in the liver. An example that doesn't work for most people is when you don't have enough insulin, and so the cells don't take in the glucose, and it wanders around, and we call that diabetes. Another example would be the pituitary gland, which sends out hormones, for example, to say start puberty, which I am sure that most of you would find infinitely more interesting. And here we have a picture of that one. This is the long distance signaling. Here's an endocrine cell of some sort, and it's got the little hormones and stuff that are going to be released into a blood vessel, which then can carry it around until it gets to the target cell. Once again, there will be receptors on that, and that will be our next little lesson. Hopefully that helps.